check. Check. I've been mic'd up a few times at my job. The public really likes that, or at least the courts really like it. Today we're going to be in Joshua 20 through 22, and let's just say a prayer here before we get started. Dear Heavenly Father, just thank you so much for this day, Lord, and we just thank you for this opportunity to be here and talk about your word and help us to glean from it things that are useful to us and help us to have a good discussion. Lord, continue to be with those that are fighting oppression and war around this world, and continue to be with those that are sick. Just help us have a great day. Watch over us and guide us. Thank you so much for your son, Jesus. In his name, amen. So Steve handed me a couple papers last week, and there's a lot of stuff on these papers. And I hadn't looked at them, or I hadn't seen them before that. And I did look at them this week. Not that I didn't look at them at all. I hadn't seen them before he handed them to me. And but at any rate, and I thought, wow, we got 3 chapters. Probably never get through that, but actually we probably, we may actually get through it. So, so the first thing, I noticed when I started reading through this stuff, one of the things that, there's some exciting stuff in the Old Testament, and then there's some things in the Old Testament that are pretty boring. And, when they just start talking about cities and people and how many they had of this and how many they had of that, and I remember reading Numbers, and I thought, why is this in here? But then I thought, it's, for those who would think that the Bible is some kind of fantasy or some kind of storytelling from ancient times or whatever, it dawned on me that no good writer would leave so much boring stuff in a book for several thousand years. And to me, it kind of, it's my opinion, it kind of almost drives home the point that, this stuff was real. There's, you can go down. They kept records, and they put it in the Bible of things that happened, and and like I said, these things, to me, if it was just a story, somebody would never leave all that stuff in there. You know what I'm saying? So it kind of brings it home, makes it kind of real, and to me, that sometimes the boredom makes it more real, if that makes sense. And so at any rate, so I'm going to start actually in 22, because I found some of the stuff in 20 to be a little more, some things that I wanted to get into a little bit more, and that kind of jumped out at me. And so this is, so to set up, what's going on is they've been through the wilderness, for 40 years, and they've got into the promised land, and they fought battles, and we're seeing now some of that, in these chapters, that sort of culmination of where they've been, and the promise that they had, after all those years. It's hard to imagine sometimes being, you're promised something, or you're not even going to get it. Your kids are going to get it, or whatever. Or as a country, a people, you're looking forward to something, or as individuals, and you have to wait a long, long time. And of course, now we're seeing that, and they're starting to give them these things, and so we see these eastern tribes. Time for them to return home. So Joshua 22. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and said to them, "You have done all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded, and you have obeyed me in everything I command for a long time now. To this very day you have not deserted your brothers, but have carried out the mission the Lord God gave you. Now that the Lord your God has given your brothers rest in the promised return to your homes in the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. But be very careful to keep the commandment and the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to obey his commands, to hold fast to him, to serve him with all your heart and all your soul." Then Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their homes. To the half-tribe of Manasseh, Moses given land in Bashan, and to the other half of the tribe, Joshua gave land in the west side of the Jordan with their brothers. Then Joshua sent them home. He blessed them, saying, "Return to your home with your great wealth, with your large herds of livestock, with your silver, your gold, your bronze, your iron, a great quantity of clothing, and divide with your brothers the plunder from your enemies." So the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh left the Israelites in Shiloh in Canaan to return to Gilead, their own land, which they had acquired to accordance with the command of the Lord through Moses. When they came to Geliloth, near the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. And when the Israelites heard that they had built the altar on the border of Canaan in Geliloth, near the Jordan on the Israelite side, the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them. And so the Israelites sent Phinehas, son of Eleazar, the priest of the land of Gilead, to Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. With him they sent 10 of the chief men, one of which the tribe of Israel, each had family and division among the Israelite clans. So what's going on? Basically, they're headed home, but they decide before they cross the Jordan River they're gonna build a big altar. And when the other Israelites that are on the, east side, or west side, on the other side, they're like, what are they doing? Or, that they're building this altar. They think they're building an altar possibly for themselves, basically, and not to God. So, if you remember back a few chapters, when people did stuff for themselves, the example was set, right? They went into battle, and when one person took from something that they weren't supposed to take from, they went into battle and they lost. And so the Israelites are looking at that and are thinking they're gonna condemn us all, if they're out of line here. So anyway, they send out some folks to talk to them, And so if you go down to like verse, let's see, 17, yeah, I think it's actually 18, but anyway, it says if you, and they talk about that, if you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow he will be angry with the whole community of Israel. If the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land where the Lord's tabernacle stands and share the land with us, but do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar for yourselves other than the altar of the Lord our God. When Achan, son of Zariah, acted unfaithfully regarding the devoted things, did not wrath come upon the whole community of Israel? And then skipping down, 21, the Reuben, then Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the clans of Israel, the mighty one, God the Lord, the mighty one, God the Lord. He knows, and let Israel know. If this has been the rebellion or disobedience to the Lord, do not spare us this day. If we have built our own altar to turn away from the Lord and to offer burnt offerings and grain offerings, or to sacrifice fellowship offerings on it, may the Lord himself call us to account. No, we did not, for the fear that someday your descendants might, and so now they're talking about what they've done. No, we did not, for the fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you Reubenites and Gadites, you have no share in the Lord. So your descendants might cause ours to stop fearing the Lord. And so what we see is that they built this as a reminder to everyone that yes, they were a part of that, and that it's actually to the Lord, not for themselves, but just as a reminder that they too are part of that promise. So, any questions or comments on chapter 22? I think that's kind of the main gist of that it's just another story of how they're kind of finding their place, how they're still very concerned with the Lord, and and things are fresh in their memory. Deep. Yeah, I was looking at some of the maps of some of these things, and I want to say, and we'll start talking about this here in a minute. There's 40 something like I think it's something like 48 cities or something like that. They throw a number out there. I didn't try to count them, but and again, that's one of those things where they're going down the list and they're talking about the different things that they were getting, and it's interesting to look at it on the map and to see the little breakdown. And one of the things that struck me was, if you follow some of the news lately, we've had congressional districting or redistricting has been a big thing. And so they've been arguing about all this stuff and everything. And what we're going to find is back in those days, they cast lots, to get those, to kind of figure some of that stuff out and to help them get it. And now, I don't know, it just seemed like somehow they got it, they divided it up, and it seemed to work, and people were just happy to be. Sharon?
I've been teaching the kids, so I haven't been in here, so I don't know what you all talked about last week, but, last week was the lesson about, where all the tribes went.
Yeah.
And I said the same thing, whoever you said taught last week, I said that, this is boring. I'm just going to come out and tell you, this is not real exciting. But the whole point of it, I think, is to show that it's been over 500 years longer that God made that promise at first to Abraham. And now finally, they're getting what he promised them.
Yeah.
And that whole storyline, goes all over the Bible. God keeps his promises.
Yep.
So if we don't focus so much sometimes on the little, details,
Right.
see the whole storyline, that helps, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's really the bigger picture is, and that's why, like I said, I didn't really go and try to count. And I thought, you could. Sometimes these lessons, it's when I try to think about it and I read through it, there's a lot of just sort of history type stuff that's boring, and that's worth talking about on one hand. But then there's the overarching story, and how does it fit in? The overarching story of the Bible, the overarching story of our lives as well. There's a book, and I was going to bring it, and I thought I'd left it in between my Amish romance novels. But I shouldn't say that because I don't want you to think that I read a lot, because I really don't read a lot of books. But no, that really is a thing. And the author is actually a member of the Church of Christ. But anyway, I digress. But the book is called The 5,000-Year Leap, and I can't remember the writers. Maybe some of you have read it or heard about it. And it's not a real recent book. But anyway, the book outlines how 5,000 years ago, a lot of our law structure, a lot of what we take for granted today is based on Mosaic law. It's based on these things. And we see some of that. Some of it's more obvious than others, but the people that wrote a lot of our modern laws, or at least structured us to get us where we're at today, that's where a lot of that stuff came from. So even things that we don't even think about, and how our society is structured. I mean, people can turn away from God and they can act like, it has no bearing on their life or anything, but it's unescapable, really. And that's kind of neat too, because, people don't even realize sometimes what effect these things in a positive way have on their lives. And but anyway, if you are somebody who reads a lot, not necessarily romance novels, but The 5,000-Year Leap is an interesting book that kind of touches on how we got here with our legal system. It's not as boring as it sounds, and how and the 5,000-year part, basically from Moses to modern times, is basically what that's referring to. That leap from, because in between there's still a lot of chaos, there's a lot of tyranny and these sorts of things, and then all of a sudden, finally, we have free societies broke out, and it's based on those teachings and those laws. So, so again, going backwards, chapter 21. And so again, remembering that they're these last few chapters are talking about what they're getting and their different cities and that sort of thing. And so now they touch on the Levites. Now the family heads of the Levites approached Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the heads of the other tribal families of Israel at Shiloh in Canaan, and said to them, "The Lord commanded through Moses that you give us towns to live in with pasture lands for our livestock." So as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns and pasture lands out of their own inheritance. The first lot came out for the Kohathites, clan by clan. The Levites, who were descendants of Aaron the priest, were allotted 13 towns from the tribes of Judah, Simeon, and Benjamin. The rest of Kohath descendants were allotted 10 towns from the clans of tribes of Ephraim, Dan, and half of Manasseh. So we see here again, it's kind of that, it's telling us, what they were given, and the different areas and towns that they were allowed to live in or were given to live in. And so basically a lot of 21 kind of goes along those lines, and it's just again talking about from the different tribes what they were given and that sort of thing. And then and so let's see. And so in verse 43, kind of what Sharon was talking about. So the Lord gave Israel all the land he had sworn to give their forefathers, and they took possession of it and settled there. The Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their forefathers. Not one of their enemies withstood them. The Lord handed all their enemies over to them. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to the house of Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled, every one of them. So again, that's exciting to think about. If you really stop and think about that, you're getting those. They were getting those promises, that long hundreds of year period of time, and here it is finally coming to fruition. As you read through, all the this part of the Bible, and a lot of stories, a lot of hardships, adventures, and things to finally get to that moment where they finally got, the promised land. And so it's kind of neat, exciting stuff. That was the payoff, yes. The payoff had finally come, and and that's part of the genius of the Lord's wisdom is how the Bible is. There's very consistent themes on these these promises, and the payoff, and it's showing that God pays off. They did what they were commanded to do. They faltered at times, as we know, but they ultimately, kept coming back and getting back in line. Yeah, human nature doesn't change as much as we'd like to think it does. And I'm always struck by that sort of, where we think as a society sometimes, or we see people that, obviously not everybody, but we see people that act like I've got it figured out. It's almost like, I remember talking with years ago, talking with a cousin, and we were kind of joking, but at our teenage, late teen years, maybe it wasn't as jovial as what it probably should have been, and it certainly is foolish. But we're like, again, it was kind of a joke, but it's like, man, what happens? You get really smart when you're a teenager, and then the older you get, you start getting older, and you just keep getting dumber and dumber and dumber. Well, the funny thing is, as I get older, I do kind of feel like I'm getting dumber, but only because I know what I don't know. I know more about what I don't know. And when you're young, you don't realize what you don't know. And
Again, coming back to God, his faithfulness, because they were so unfaithful to him.
yeah,
Down through his patience, his long suffering. He was always faithful to the covenant that he made to Abraham.
yeah,
All down through it, no matter. And he had told him, now if you don't do this, then this will happen to you. So that's not him being unfaithful. It's just he was faithful to what he said was going to happen.
yep, yep. So in chapter 20, they talk about cities of refuge. Now there's some other references in other places to those cities of refuge. And when I first read it, I thought, well, this is kind of, interesting. What does this, what does this mean? So anyway, chapter 20, verse 1, then the Lord said to Joshua, tell the Israelites to designate the cities of refuge as I instructed you through Moses, so that anyone who kills a person accidentally and unintentionally may flee there and find protection from the avenger of blood. When he flees to one of these cities, he is to stand in the entrance of the city gate and state his case before the elders of that city. So I'm like, okay, avengers of blood, okay, that's kind of makes sense, just on face value. Somebody's assigned when there's a murder, basically. In those days, somebody would carry out the sort of eye for an eye, I guess, kind of thing. And but it talks about people who accidentally and unintentionally killed somebody. And I thought, man, was that a thing? It happens, right? Certainly, I've dealt with automobile crashes and stuff all my life or all my adult life. And yeah, we see accidental deaths, right? Things happen. Maybe it's a car crash or something, or, somebody didn't intend to kill that person. They didn't set out that day or whatever. And, but I thought, was this happening so much that they felt like they needed to have cities properly spaced out so that people could get to these safe cities because so many people were accidentally killing other people? Anyway, but that's not really the point. But if we go to Deuteronomy 19, verse 4, Deuteronomy 19, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 4. If I can get there. So we see here it's explained. This is the rule concerning the man who kills another and flees there, meaning to the city of refuge, to save his life. One who kills his neighbor unintentionally without malice and forethought. For instance, a man may go into the forest with his neighbor to cut wood, and as he swings his axe to fell a tree, the head may fly off and hit the neighbor and kill him. That man may flee to one of those cities and save his life. Otherwise, the avenger of blood might pursue him in a rage and overtake him in the distance, if the distance is too great, the distance from where he's at to the city, and kill him, even though he is not deserving of death, since he did it to his neighbor without malice, forethought. This is why I command you to set aside yourselves 3 cities. Now, this is earlier on, so later on in Joshua, they actually set aside a few more cities. If the Lord your God enlarges your territory, and he says this, as promised on oath to your forefathers, and gives you the whole land he promised them, because you carefully follow all these laws that I command you to do, to love the Lord your God, to walk always in his ways, then you are to set aside there 3 more cities. Do this so that innocent blood will not be shed on your land, which the Lord your God is giving you as your inheritance, and so that you will not be guilty of bloodshed. So really what we're seeing here is, it sounds kind of strange, it's like they're talking about some guy accidentally getting hit by a flying axe head and some kind of random calamity. But what it really means is that person is innocent. They didn't murder that person, right? They didn't set out to kill him. It was an accident. It really was a random kind of thing. And so there's not a sin there. There's no bloodshed on that land, defiling that land. But if then somebody catches up with them and kills them, then that's innocent blood has been shed and on the land. And so to avoid that, that situation, to avoid innocent blood being shed, that's why he set up those cities of refuge. And of course, as you guys know, I'm always going to kind of talk about things that are close to me, and one of the things I thought about was, a modern example is, police shootings. And I don't know, I feel like I kind of have to touch on it because it's just kind of, it amazes me because that's something very near and dear to me. How all the way back then, there's the concept that sometimes things happen, and we shouldn't just jump to conclusions and go, destroy that person and that kind of thing. And so that's one of the first things I thought about when I read that sort of concept is, how somebody doesn't set out in the morning to end up taking another's life. But yet in our modern world, what are we? The modern world's kind of the avenger of blood with no city of refuge, right? Society would just like the mob mentality would just like to take somebody out. And, but it's not just, that's a big example of things that we see on the news, but it's even little things too, where the mob wants to cancel people. One little disagreement and the mob wants to destroy that person's whole life and livelihood and that kind of thing. And we see that, there's kind of a connection there. We know it's not right, but yet there are very similar things right here in the Bible from thousands of years ago that are explaining that very sort of concept and why it's wrong and why we shouldn't do it. So it goes on to talk about, so the person didn't tighten their axe head up and it flew off and it hit their coworker and killed him. So they flee to the city of refuge. And so then chapter 20, Joshua, let's see, we'll go down here about verse 5. If the avenger of blood pursues him, they must not surrender the one accused from the city of refuge, because he killed his neighbor unintentionally and without malice or forethought. He is to stay in that city until he has stood trial before the assembly, until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then he may go back to his own home in the town from which he fled. Which I thought was interesting. It's like he can go to that city, he basically pleads his case, he gets found innocent, but the only way he still has protection is if he stays there until the high priest dies. That's an interesting, how old is the high priest and how long is he going to live? I don't know. Maybe they only got there until they were elderly, and maybe there was a high turnover rate. I don't know.
So he stayed until the high priest dies, and then he can go back home. So does that mean he's innocent when he leaves?
Yep,
Still innocent,
yep,
so nobody on the outside.
yep. He is to stay in the city until he stood trial before the assembly and until the death of the high priest who is serving at that time. Then he may go back home to his own home and the town from which he fled. So they set apart Kedesh and Galilee and the hill country, and then it goes down and talks about some of these other towns. But one of the things that was interesting, though, in reading some of the commentary and wrapping up, what does in the Bible does that remind you? The idea of the refuge, the city of refuge, the priests, that stand trial, and then not being able to truly go home until that priest has died. What in the Bible is that sort of? Exactly. There's a promise of that place. He sacrificed, and maybe I'm not articulating it as well as I would like to, but when Jesus died, that forgave us, and then you can go home. You're fully able to be forgiven of that sin or that accusation is gone. The priest found you innocent, and then when he dies, then you can go home. And so there's some stuff, if you kind of Google some of that stuff, there's some maybe a better articulated commentary on that, but that's kind of one of the things that I drew from that and found in that. Yep. Yep. So not just a collection of who went where and who got what and where it was at. As always, there's something a little bit more in there. All right. Questions, comments? All right. Thanks for the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you. I'm trying to keep a low profile.